unlawfully in its care to people in care homes during the COVID pandemic. It's obviously going to be a huge focus of the COVID inquiry that is due to start later this year. But in terms of PMQs, this has only just come out, and as I understand it, Keir Starmer very keen to lead on the issues around cost of living and tax cuts or rises ahead of the local elections next week. I was out and about in Wolverhampton yesterday talking to voters, and it is the one issue on everyone's minds. Everyone is feeling the pinch. People talking to me about petrol going up, food costs going up, struggling to make ends meet. One trader saying to me it was the worst he'd seen it in 20 years in terms of the squeeze on his own income and the costs pressures he is under. So it's something people really feel. It's very immediate. There's local elections next week, and I'm sure that Keir Starmer will press the Prime Minister on a matter that he knows matters to voters.
And we'll hope, I guess, to get a set of responses from the Prime Minister on that topic. Just rounding off the High Court ruling very quickly. Clearly, we have got a statement from the NHS. We've heard from Matt Hancock, spokesperson, of course, who you spoke to just last week, but we haven't heard from the government yet. So the Prime Minister presumably will have had to come up with some level of response on that issue. Well,
I'm sure that someone will ask him in the chamber about the ruling, and I'm sure he will have a response. And I would imagine, knowing how they handle these sorts of things, he will refer it to the inquiry. As you said, Matt Hancock in an interview with me last week, when I said to him, was it a mistake to discharge people from hospital into care homes? He said, no, it wasn't. And he had a series of other reasons that he gave for that, which you can watch that interview on YouTube. You can find the link. That was from last week. But the High Court said that despite a growing awareness of asymptomatic transmissions through March 2020, there was no evidence that was raised or addressed. So the government knew that the asymptomatic transmissions was happening, but they didn't actually affect policies quick enough to best protect people in care homes. And the result was that many people died that perhaps didn't need to, and that is a sore on people's hearts that lost loved ones that cannot be erased, and it will be, I'm sure, a huge issue in this upcoming inquiry into the lessons from the pandemic.
Beth, thank you. Let's go to the Commons. PMQs begins.
PMQs of this session, I wanted to remind the House of what we have achieved. More than 20 acts of Parliament have been passed, including our National Insurance Act that will increase the thresholds from July and be worth an average of £330 a year, the largest single personal tax cut for a decade. And our Economic Crime Act to respond to Putin's illegal war in Ukraine. And we hope by the end of the session to have passed our Borders Bill to take control of our immigration system, our Police Bill to make our streets safer, our Health Bill to reduce bureaucracy and help cut the COVID backlogs. Only today, new figures show that we have already recruited over 13,500 additional police since 2019, well ahead of our 12,000 target. Those police are already on your streets, making your community safer. We're focusing on delivering the people's priorities, and there is plenty more to come in the Queen's speech on the 10th of May. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, in addition to my duties in this House. I shall have further such meetings later today.
Thank you,
Mr. Speaker. As a proud maritime nation, the United Kingdom has long relied on its coastal communities to help deliver national prosperity. But today, too many of them face shared challenges and disproportionately high levels of deprivation. Does my right honourable friend therefore agree with me that to ensure beautiful constituencies like mine in Hastings and Rye can properly unleash their full potential, a specific and targeted government strategy focusing on communities, on coastal communities, is needed? And will he meet with me to discuss this?
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker. And if she looks at the Levelling Up White Paper, she will find that it is indeed directed clearly at enhancing and improving the lives in our coastal communities, tilting resource and attention towards those fantastic coastal communities, and I will make sure that she gets a meeting with the relevant minister as soon as possible.
Now comes the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know the Prime Minister will have whipped his backbenchers to scream and shout, and that's fine. That's fine. But I I hope he's also sent a clear message that there's no place for sexism and misogyny or looking down on people because of where they come from in his party, in this House, or in modern Britain. Next year, Mr. Speaker, the UK is set for the slowest growth and the highest inflation in the G7. Why is he failing to manage the economy?
Mr. Speaker, well, let me first of all say, in response to what the right honourable gentleman has said about sexism and misogyny, that I exchanged messages with the right honourable lady over the weekend, and I repeat what I said to her. There could be absolutely no place for such behaviour or such expression in this House, and we should treat each other, Mr. Speaker, frankly, with the respect that each other deserves. So, and on his point about the economy. Yes, of course it is true that there is a crisis of global inflation around the world, but this government is tackling it with all sorts of ways that you would expect, Mr. Speaker, helping people with the cost of their energy, British energy, far more, by the way, than the Labour will put in, a British energy security strategy to undo the mistakes of previous Labour governments, Mr. Speaker, but above all, making sure that we have the fastest growth in the G7 last year, which would not have been possible if we listened to him. And if we listened to him, we would have frankly never have come out of lockdown, Mr. Speaker, in July last year. And never forget, Mr. Speaker, that no Labour government has left office with unemployment lower than when they came in.
Mr. Speaker, he sounds like the comical alley of the cost of living crisis. He pretends the economy is booming, but where there are problems, they're global. But in the real world, our growth is set to be slower than every G20 country except one, Russia. And our inflation is going to be double the rest of the G7. Does he think that denying the facts, staring him in the face, makes things better or worse for working people?
Mr. Speaker, the facts are, as the IMF has said, that the UK came out of COVID faster than anybody else. That's why we had the fastest growth in the G7 last year. That would not have happened, Mr. Speaker, if we'd listened to Captain Hindsight. And if he studies their forecast, we will return to being the fastest by 2024 and the fastest in 2025, Mr. Speaker. That's what the IMF's forecasts say. He asks about, read it. He asks about working people, Mr. Speaker. This is the government, this is the party that supports working people. Unlike them, with the biggest increase, yes, I'll tell you what's going up. The living wage is going up, Mr. Speaker, by record amounts. Employment is going up, Mr. Speaker, by record amounts. 500,000 more people. They don't want to hear that. Let me give them the figures. 500,000 more people in paid employment now than there were before the pandemic began, and youth unemployment at or near record lows. Under Labour, just to remind you, everybody, under Labour, youth unemployment rose by 45%.
Mr. Speaker, this must be the Oxford Union debating skills we've been hearing so much about. Failing to answer the question, rambling incoherently, throwing in garbled metaphors. Powerful stuff, Prime Minister. Here's the problem. It's not just his words that are complacent, it's his actions as well. The cost of living crisis was blindingly obvious months ago. But he said worries about inflation were unfounded. And he backed a tax-hiking budget. Does he think that his choice to be the only leader in the G7 to raise taxes during a cost of living crisis has made things better or worse for working people?
Mr. Speaker, as I've just explained to the House, and I'll repeat it once more, this government and our Chancellor cut taxes on working people. The national insurance contribution went down, Mr. Speaker, by an average of £330. But if he's talking about the health and care levy, maybe that's what he's droning on about. Look at the health and care levy, Mr. Speaker. That is what is enabling us to pay for 50,000 more nurses, to pay for clearing the COVID backlogs. How tragic, how pitiful that the party of Bevan should now be opposed to that investment in the NHS, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, he's an ostrich, perfectly happy keeping his head in the sand. Working people are worried about paying their bills. They're spending less and cutting back. That's bad for business and bad for growth. Yeah. Working people are looking for help. But this week, millions will look at their payslip and see a tax rise with his fingerprints all over it. Does he think that his 15th tax rise has made things better or worse for working people?
Mr. Speaker, what we're doing for working people is not only lifting the living wage by the record amount, helping people on universal credit with a £1,000 tax cut, Mr. Speaker, but also cutting national insurance contributions, lifting the threshold so that on average people pay £330 less, Mr. Speaker. But what we're also doing is taking our country and our economy forward, investing in our NHS, which is a priority for the people of this country, unlike for the Labour Party, Mr. Speaker, but also ensuring that we have record creation of jobs, Mr. Speaker, and that is what matters. High-wage, high-skill jobs. 500,000 more. They don't care about jobs, Mr. Speaker. We do. We do. We believe in high-wage, high-skill jobs, and that's the answer for the economy.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, it's as if he's only just waking up to the cost of living crisis. And his big idea, fewer MOTs. It actually makes the Cones hotline sound visionary and inspirational. North Sea oil producers are making so much unexpected profit, they call themselves a cash machine. Yes. That cash could be used to keep energy bills down. Instead, he chooses to protect their profits. Let household bills rocket and slap taxes on working people who are earning a living. Does he think that that choice has made things better or worse for working people?
What we're doing is making things better for working people than his plans would do by a mile, Mr. Speaker. We're raising more, we're putting more to support people with their energy costs than he would with his new tax on business. £9.1 billion that we're putting in, an immediate £150 cut in people's council tax. Their thing only raises £6.6 billion. And what it does is it clobbers the very businesses that we need to invest in energy to bring the prices down for people across this country. Clean, green energy, the wind farms, the hydrogen that this country needs. And what this government is also doing, Mr. Speaker, is reversing the tragic, historic mistake of the Labour Party in refusing to invest in nuclear. We're going to have a nuclear reactor every year and not a nuclear reactor every decade, which is what we got under Labour.
So they're the party of excess oil and gas profits, and we're the party of working people. This Tory government's had its head in the sand throughout the cost of living crisis. First, they let prices get out of control. Then they denied it was happening. They failed to do anything about it, and then they made it worse with higher taxes. Because of his choices, we are set to have the slowest growth and the highest inflation in the G7. Mr. Speaker, a vote for Labour next week is a vote for a very different set of choices. We would ask oil and gas companies to pay their fair share and reduce energy costs. We wouldn't hammer working people with the worst possible tax at the worst possible time. We'd insulate homes to get bills down. And we'd closed the tax avoidance schemes that have helped his Chancellor, where is he, reduce his family's tax bill while putting everyone else's up. That's a proper plan for the economy. So why doesn't he get on with it and finally make choices that make things better, not worse, for working people?
Mr. Speaker, I can tell the right honourable gentleman, I've listened to him over many weeks, so many years, this guy is doomed to be a permanent spectator, Mr. Speaker, because we have a plan to fix the NHS and fix social care. They have no plan. We have a plan to fix our borders with our deal with Rwanda. They have no plan. We have a plan to take our economy forward. They have no plan. Mr. Speaker, let me tell you something, Mr. Speaker. He talks about the elections. He talks about the elections in a few days' time, Mr. Speaker. Let me remind him that everywhere you look, a Labour administration, it is a bankrupt shambles, Mr. Speaker. Hammersmith Council spent Labour-run Hammersmith spent £27,000 on EU flags, Mr. Speaker, 2 years after the referendum. Labour-run Nottingham Council bankrupt because of their investment in some communist energy plan of the kind that he now favours. He should apologise for it. Labour-run Croydon bankrupt, Mr. Speaker, because of their dodgy property deals. And never forget, Labour-run Britain in 2010, bankrupt because of what the Labour government did. And they said they had no money left. Mr. Speaker, he looks at council tax. Look at the difference between, he boasts he lives in Islington or Camden or somewhere like that. He should contrast neighbouring Westminster, which has the lowest council tax in the country, and better services too. That's the difference between Labour and Conservative across the country, Mr. Speaker. Vote Conservative on the 5th of May.
Join me in welcoming the huge step forward in the regeneration of Hena Town Centre in my constituency by the successful purchase of the rundown old grammar school building using the government's Towns Fund money this week. And would he agree that's exactly the sort of local delivery people should be voting on in next week's local election?
My honourable friend is entirely right, and those are the issues on which people are going to be voting. And as I said, they're going to be voting for better value, for better services and lower council taxes, and I hope they'll be voting Conservative.
Now comes the Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I associate myself with the remarks of the Leader of the Opposition and the absolutely disgusting misogyny and sexism that was witnessed by the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party. That should shame us all, what has happened over the last few days. Mr. Speaker, this morning, the Trussell Trust confirmed that 830,000 children across the UK are being left to depend on emergency food parcels. So instead of convening a Tory talking shop at Cabinet, the Prime Minister should be acting to help those children and help families through the cost of living emergency. If he is genuinely looking for ideas to tackle this Tory-made crisis, he'd be wiser to look beyond his Cabinet colleagues, who of course know that he won't be there for very much longer. So, as a parting gift, here's an idea for the Prime Minister. The Scottish Government has introduced and now doubled the game-changing Scottish child payment of at least £1,040 a year, helping those families who are being the hardest hit. Is the Prime Minister prepared to match this payment across the UK to help families through this emergency?
Mr. Speaker, what we're doing to help families, and of course, it's important to do everything we can to help families in a tough time. And that's why we've massively increased the funds available to local councils to support families that are having a particular hardship. The Holidays and Activities Fund, now running at £200 million, is there as well. We will do everything we can to support families throughout this period when we're dealing with the aftershocks of the COVID pandemic, Mr. Speaker. But if I may say so, I think this is another example, and he may not appreciate me pointing this out, but it is true, as another example of the vital strength of our economic union and the importance of support from the UK Treasury, which is what he gets.
Ian Blackford.
My goodness, Mr Speaker, we have children facing poverty. The Scottish Government are responding by the child payment, and by the way, it will increase again later this year, and we get nothing. We get nothing but empty words from the Prime Minister. It was plenty of desperate pre-election waffle that we heard earlier, but I'll take it as a no. There is no support for hard-pressed families. It is clearer by the day that the Prime Minister's supposed plan to fight the Tory-made cost of living crisis is not only non-fiscal, it's non-existent. So, Prime Minister, I'll try again. Here are 3 other ideas for the Prime Minister that would help families with soaring costs right now. Scrap his national insurance tax hike, reverse the Tory cuts to universal credit, and match Scotland's 6% benefits rise instead of imposing a real-term cut. 3 things that will make a difference to millions of people. Has the Prime Minister come to terms with the reality that if he fails to act now, the voters will send him and his sleaze-ridden party a message by voting SNP next Thursday?
Mr Speaker, we're helping families up and down the country with the universal credit. He asked about universal credit. We're tapering it so that people get another £1,000 in their pockets. Working people get another £1,000 in their pockets. We're helping families in the way that I have described, Mr Speaker. And just to remind the House that under this government there are now far fewer children in work-less households than there were before this government came in. And that is because we believe in championing work, championing employment and helping people into high-wage, high-skilled jobs. That's what counts. And as for our respective political longevities, well, I wouldn't like to bet on him outlasting me, Mr Speaker.
Laura Farris.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Last April, the Berkshire West CAM service received an additional £120 million to tackle waiting times for autism and ADHD diagnoses. 12 months on, they have outlined a general ambition to reduce delays, but have set no targets or timescales for improvement, with some families still waiting 2 years for their child to be seen. Does my right honourable friend agree that when significant investment of public money is made, people have the right to know how and when services will be improved? And would he support my campaign for a 12-month maximum wait for any family in West Berkshire seeking a diagnosis of this kind?
She's absolutely right, and it's a great campaign that she's running, Mr Speaker, and the government is indeed providing the funding to improve autism and learning disability services, but it's also important that people get the diagnosis that the assessment that they need within 12 weeks, and the measures in our health and care bill will approve local accountability for those services.
Sir Geoffrey Donaldson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Road Haulage Association has confirmed that the cost of moving goods from this part of the United Kingdom to Northern Ireland has risen by 27% in the first year of the operation of the protocol. The Irish Sea border is harming our economy. It is undermining political stability in Northern Ireland. Next week, the people of Northern Ireland will go to the polls to elect an assembly. What hope can the Prime Minister give to the people of Northern Ireland that this protocol will be removed and that Northern Ireland's place within the UK internal market will be restored?
I thank him very much, and I think that what the whole House will want to support is the balance and symmetry of the Good Friday Agreement. That's what really matters. That's a great legacy for all of us, and it's vital that the protocol or that the arrangements we have in Northern Ireland should command the support of all sides, and that's what this government will undertake to ensure.
Ben Bradley.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm grateful to the Prime Minister for the additional funding and support that Mansfield has received over recent years for education and skills, for tackling crime, and for our town centres. We'll be bidding into the Levelling Up Fund as well this spring. Mansfield residents now want to see the tangible outcomes of those capital funds for the town centre. So could my right honourable friend look seriously at how we might help accelerate the process, often lengthy process, of getting from successful funding announcement to spades in the ground so that my residents can benefit from those investments?
My honourable friend is a fantastic champion for Mansfield and indeed a wider area. I'm delighted that Mansfield was awarded £12 million as part of the Towns Fund. I can't endorse any specific project, but the next round is coming up shortly and will be announced in the autumn.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. 56 members of this House are under investigation for sexual misconduct, and that includes 3 of his cabinet ministers. The Prime Minister has just rightly said that there can be no place for sexism and misogyny in this House. So can he now confirm whether he considers that sexual harassment, apparently unlike bullying and lying, is grounds for dismissal under the Ministerial Code?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And of course, sexual harassment is intolerable, and it's quite right that members should now have a procedure by which they can bring that to the attention of the House authorities. And I think that's a good thing. And of course, it's grounds for dismissal.
Ram.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Financial scams have grown dramatically in recent years and are now the most common form of crime, harming millions of families every year. Most of them are enabled by online platforms such as Facebook and Google that make vast profits from advertising fraudsters. Does my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, agree with me that those companies that profit from promoting fraud should help pay the cost of fraud, and that online platforms should compensate victims that they help create? And will he work with me to achieve that end?
Look, I have to say, Mr. Speaker, to my honourable friend who I've known for many years, I think this is typical of his creativity. We are going to look at exactly how we could make that kind of measure work. I think it's important that we proceed with care and get it right, and I'm going to make sure that he has a meeting with the relevant minister in DCMS as fast as possible.
Vicky Foxcroft.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hundreds and thousands of people are still shielding. They're living in fear of COVID as they know the vaccine hasn't mounted an antibody response for them, and they remain at increased risk of serious illness or death. There is hope, though, Evershed, which gives immunocompromised people 83% protection for 6 months. Sadly, the government hasn't ordered any of this, despite the MHRA giving approval on the 17th of March. Now, I appreciate the Prime Minister might not have all of the details to hand, so will he meet with me to talk about this life-saving and life-changing drug?
I thank her very much, and I think she's absolutely right to speak up for those who are shielding and who are anxious, and we're doing everything we can to protect and to reassure them. On Evershed, we are evaluating it at the moment, but I will make sure that she has a meeting as soon as possible with the Department of Health.
Thank you,
Mr. Speaker. My Conservative council in Kensington and Chelsea charges £500 less council tax than neighbouring Camden Labour. And it has 4 times as many bin collections. You haven't misheard. £500 less, 4 times as many. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that everyone who wants low council tax and good services needs to vote Conservative?
Mr. Speaker, do I agree with my honourable friend? There is not a syllable with which any sensible person in this country could possibly dissent.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the Daily Telegraph, not normally a paper that I read, but I did read this headline that said Northern Ireland could be forced to follow EU rules on COVID tests. The Chancellor told the House that Northern Ireland could benefit from moves to scrap VAT on energy efficiency measures because of the protocol. So now the protocol's restrictions threaten the shortage of COVID tests in Northern Ireland. So can I ask the Prime Minister, the financial cost of the protocol can be measured, but the true cost in relation to VAT, to medicines, to COVID tests and damaged relationships is much, much greater. When is the government and my Prime Minister going to restore our place in the United Kingdom?
I thank you very much, and there is clearly an economic cost to the protocol. And that is also now turning into a political problem and an imbalance in sentiment about it. We need to rectify that balance for the sake of the Good Friday Agreement on which this country depends.
Paul Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. By 2025, Liberal Democrat Eastleigh Borough Council will have a debt of £650 million, which stands at £6,300 for every resident in Eastleigh. Does the Prime Minister think that it is acceptable for this council to become a speculative property developer? And what advice would he give to my constituents next week to put a stop to this casino council and its profligate ways?
My honourable friend is completely right about Eastleigh Borough Council, the debts they have run up, and I can't even see the leader of the Liberal Democrats in his place. Not even delivering value for money for his own constituents, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, the cost of household food bills is set to rise by £271 this year as prices soar. The supermarkets are lowering their prices to help customers struggling to buy food. And the Resolution Foundation have reported that 1.3 million low-income Britons will be pushed into absolute poverty by the cost of living crisis. But this government is doing nothing to protect people who are struggling. If the supermarkets are stepping in to protect people's pockets, what will the Prime Minister do?
What we've done just in the last few months is put £22 billion in to help people with, excuse me, Mr. Speaker, with the cost of living. But I want to pay tribute and to those businesses which are now trying to protect consumers from the impact of the global inflation crisis. And the fact is that many businesses now do have the cash reserves, not to take prices, as they put it, but to shield consumers from the impact, and I hope that they do so.
Stride.
Mr. Speaker, I've recently been contacted by my Ukrainian counterpart, the chair of the Ukrainian Treasury Committee, with some ideas as to how we can further tighten the screw on the Russian economy, particularly through the international tax regime. And I was, of course, able to affirm the full support of the Ukrainian people from right across this House. And also, the gentleman concerned, of course, knows the work that my right honourable friend has done to promote sanctions internationally. But would he consider meeting with me to consider these new proposals that are being brought forward so that we make sure no stone is unturned in facing up to Putin's vile regime?
I thank my right honourable friend for what he has been doing and what his Select Committee has been doing in this area about tightening the screw on Putin's regime. And I think that UK companies have already shown that they think very carefully about investments doing business with Putin's Russia. We put a ban, as he knows, on all new outward investment in Russia, Mr. Speaker, but I'm very happy to make sure that further ideas from my right honourable friend should be transmitted to the government and to have the meeting as soon as possible.
Jeff Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last night we learned that the Home Secretary put the member for Wakefield on an expert panel offering advice on sexual exploitation. At the time, he was under a police investigation following allegations he assaulted a minor, for which he's since been found guilty. He sat on this panel long after the Conservative Party had received a complaint from his victim. Isn't the Prime Minister ashamed that his party didn't take the victim seriously and put someone who abused a minor in such an important position? And does he wish to take the opportunity to apologise to them?
Mr. Speaker, I believe that the Home Office has already made a statement about it, and if there's any further comment to make, they will be making a statement.
Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Newcastle Underlying Borough Council has secured millions of pounds of government investment for our high street, but we do have a problem with persistent antisocial behaviour on the high street. And so therefore, would my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, welcome the recent appointments of a new Chief Constable for Staffordshire, a new Borough Commander for Newcastle, and the fact that Newcastle will get its own dedicated response unit? And will he also set out what further measures the government is taking to combat crime and antisocial behaviour?
I thank my honourable friend, who is an avid champion of his constituents, and wait and see. And Mr. Speaker, I can tell him. I think maybe he missed what I said earlier on. But we're now running at 13,576 more police on the streets of this country as a result of the actions taken by this government, and tougher sentences as well, Mr. Speaker, opposed by the party opposite. cracking down on drugs gangs, Mr. Speaker, when that party is soft on drugs. I think the Leader of the Opposition said he would decriminalise, he didn't want people with Class A drugs to face prison sentences, Mr. Speaker. I think I heard him say that. And, of course, cracking down on cross-channel migrant gangs, Mr. Speaker, on people who risk the lives of migrants in the English Channel. We're cracking down on them, and as far as I know, they would scrap the agreement, the Economic and Migration Partnership with Rwanda, Mr. Speaker. We have a plan, they don't.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. 4.5 million people pay for their gas and electricity using a prepayment meter. They already pay more for their energy than direct debit customers, and the number of people who are disconnecting themselves because they've run out of money for the meter is increasing. What is the Prime Minister going to do to ensure that all of our constituents have a right to light and to warmth?
Mr. Speaker, we're working with Ofgem and all the companies to ensure that we protect people in this difficult time. But what we're also doing is making sure that we support people not just with the cold weather payments, the winter fuel payments, but making sure that through £500 million more to councils, we look after people, and this will be the types of people that the right honourable gentleman is referring to, who are finding it particularly tough. We will do everything we can to shield the people of this country as we get through the aftershocks of COVID and deal with a global inflation problem.
Mr. Speaker, within the last hour or so, it's been reported that some 287 members of this House have been sanctioned by the Russian state. Now, I'm sure nobody here is rushing to change their summer holiday plans, but perhaps the Prime Minister will assure us that he will continue his excellent relationship with President Zelensky and continue to provide the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian military with the support that they need.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's I think no disrespect to those who haven't been sanctioned when I say that all those 287 should regard it as a badge of honour. What we will do, Mr. Speaker, is keep up our robust and principled support for the Ukrainian people and their right to protect their lives, their families, and to defend themselves. That's what this country is doing, and that has the overwhelming support, I think, of the whole House.
Final question, Daisy Cooper.
Mr. Speaker, today a court has found that the government acted unlawfully when its policies led to the discharge of untested patients from hospitals to care homes at the start of the pandemic. The court also found no evidence that the former Health Secretary addressed the issue of the risk to care home residents of such transmission, despite the government insisting at the time that a protective ring had been thrown around care homes. The government has once again been found to have broken the law. Will the Prime Minister apologise to the families of the thousands and thousands of people who died in care homes in the first half of 2020? And will he also apologise to care workers for the shameful comment that he made in July 2020 when he said that too many care homes didn't follow procedures in the way that they could have?
Mr. Speaker, of course I want to renew my apologies and sympathies for all those who lost loved ones during the pandemic, people who lost loved ones in care homes. And I want to remind the House of what an incredibly difficult time that was and how difficult that decision was. And we didn't know very much about the disease. And the point I was trying to make, to which she refers, is the thing that we didn't know in particular, Mr. Speaker, was that COVID could be transmitted asymptomatically in the way that it was. And that was something that I wish we had known more about at the time. As for the ruling that she mentions, we will study it and we will, of course, respond further in due course.
Michael Fabricant.
Mr. Speaker, as you've just heard from my honourable friend, the member for Milton Keynes North, the Interfax news agency, under an hour ago in Moscow, announced that the foreign ministry of the Russian government will now sanction 287 members and former members of the House of Commons from both sides of this House. I'm proud to say, Mr. Speaker, that both you and I are on that list. So, Mr. Speaker, are you able to give any advice to members of the House of Commons, honourable and right honourable members, regarding this?
Normally I wouldn't, but I think it is an important matter, and I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for letting me know at the start of questions that he wanted to catch my eye. Although the issue is raised is not strictly a point of order, I am of course alarmed to hear what is reported to the Chamber. Rather than give a knee-jerk reaction now, I am sure the Government will rapidly be assessing the implications of this move. I am therefore asking the Government to keep me and the House authorities briefed on this very important issue, and I shall make and abide sure that members are kept informed as appropriate.
Further to that.
Sorry, further to that point.
I'm very grateful. I'm absolutely distressed that I'm not on the list, Mr. Speaker. And if I'm honest, slightly surprised. I can only assume that the Russian Federation accepts that every single thing that I have said about President Putin over the last few years is true. He is a barbarous villain, and we must make sure that he fails.
I'm sure you know me and put yourself on that list.
Prime Minister's questions wrapping up just there. A few questions to the Speaker, in fact, about the sanctioning by Russian authorities of 287 MPs, which crossed via the Interfax news agency about an hour ago, was how things were wrapping up. But before we discuss PMQs, we wanted to hit a couple of bits of breaking news that have crossed in the last 40 minutes. First, reaction to that High Court ruling, which found the government acted unlawfully, releasing patients from hospitals to care homes at the beginning of the COVID pandemic. We've got a statement from Charlie Williams, a spokesperson for the COVID-19 Bereaved Families for Justice group. Part of that statement says, for the thousands of families like mine who lost loved ones in care homes, the last 2 years of cover-ups and denials have been unbelievably painful. We've always known that our loved ones were thrown to the wolves by the government, and the claims by Matt Hancock that a protective ring was made around care homes was a sickening lie. Now, a court has found their decisions unlawful, and it's clear the decisions taken led to people dying who may otherwise still be with their loved ones today. We now need to see those responsible for those dark days held accountable and lessons learnt to save lives, ensuring the grim scenes of spring 2020 are never repeated. That topic only came up once towards the end of PMQs, a question from Daisy Cooper, Lib Dem, to the Prime Minister about the High Court judgment. And the Prime Minister actually reiterated somewhat the tone from Matt Hancock's statement earlier, saying we didn't know that COVID could be transmitted asymptomatically and they wished they'd known it earlier. He said he'd study the court case. Now, we had a second bit of breaking news during PMQs. The Office of Conservative Chief Whip Chris Heaton-Harris says he's investigating reports that a Conservative MP watched pornography on his phone in the Commons chamber. A statement from the Conservative Whip's office said the Chief Whip is looking into this matter. This behaviour is wholly unacceptable and action will be taken. Beth Rigby, of course, is with me, our political editor. We'll get to PMQs, Beth, but extraordinary bit of news crossing about a frontbench MP, no less, apparently watching porn in the Commons chamber.
Yeah, this is quite a shocking story, and it emerged in a conversation between female MPs last night, and I've had it corroborated by an MP that was in that meeting, and apparently at that meeting a female minister said that an MP was watching pornography next to her. So the supposition is it's a front bench, but that hasn't been explicitly said. And a colleague in the room immediately corroborated that. I was also told that this female minister, apparently also said that the culprit had been doing this in committees, so in committee meetings, that this had also happened there. So this, in terms of her evidence, wasn't the first occasion. And I've also been told that the women, that the two MPs have subsequently spoken to the Chief Whip, Chris Heaton-Harris, and Chris Heaton-Harris has made a statement, if I can find it. He has said, so I'm just trying to find it, the Chief Whip is looking into this matter. This behaviour is wholly unacceptable. So apparently the MPs have named this person to the Chief Whip, and they're now looking into it. The Prime Minister has said in the Commons just then that sexual harassment is grounds for dismissal. Let's see what comes of that. But I should also say, in the round of all of this, Caroline Wheeler, the political editor of the Sunday Times, had an exclusive story on Sunday saying that over 50 MPs were being investigated for sexual harassment. So a truly shocking story, and I think it will have some way to run. And I think everyone was pretty amazed that female MPs are sharing stories and experiences like that in their place of work.
Absolutely, and the question, as you mentioned, that led the Prime Minister to say that, of course, sexual harassment is grounds for dismissal came from a question from Caroline Lucas about sexual harassment, and no doubt had this story crossed about supposedly a Tory MP watching porn in the House before PMQs, no doubt that would have been incorporated as well. As you said, the Chief Whip, Chris Heaton-Harris, said that action will be taken. Let's pivot, Beth, to PMQs, and you were absolutely right beforehand when we listed all these extraordinary talking points today, from Russian-Ukraine to that High Court ruling to Partygate, but all of the questions from the opposition leader, Keir Starmer, were about the cost of living crisis.
Exactly. This is an opposition leader that, at this moment, 10 days out from, actually less than that, a week out from local elections, where 4,350 or more council seats in England being contested, a number of different councils. He is very much focused on speaking to voters and using PMQs to try and press home the point of criticising Boris Johnson, not just over the cost of living crisis, but also actually in that PMQs, criticising him over his handling of the economy. You know that for evermore, really, that the Conservatives have always been the party more trusted on the economy. It's an area of weakness for Labour. Labour traditionally always been the party strong on the NHS. But Keir Starmer really criticising the Prime Minister, also raising something that the Prime Minister said to us back in October, actually, when the cost of living crisis and fears over inflation began to really build. In an interview with me, he said that those fears over inflation were unfounded. And Keir Starmer there using the Prime Minister's words and turning it back on him, saying, "You're an ostrich." He said he called the Prime Minister an ostrich, keeping his head in the sand on the cost of living, naming 15 tax rises. The Prime Minister responded saying, "We have a plan for the NHS. We've had to raise taxes for social care." But it's a difficult period for the Prime Minister because the cost of living crisis is real and it's really hurting voters.
You referenced that being an absolute key part of PMQs, and we can listen to that now, that exchange on the cost of living crisis between Sir Keir Starmer and the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson.
He's an ostrich, perfectly happy keeping his head in the sand. Working people are worried about paying their bills. They're spending less and cutting back. That's bad for business and bad for growth. Working people are looking for help. But this week, millions will look at their payslip and see a tax rise with his fingerprints all over it. Does he think that his 15th tax rise has made things better or worse for working people?
Mr. Speaker, what we're doing for working people is not only lifting the living wage by the record amount, helping people on universal credit with a £1,000 tax cut, Mr. Speaker, but also cutting national insurance contributions, lifting the threshold so that on average people pay £330 less, Mr. Speaker. But what we're also doing is taking our country and our economy forward, investing in our NHS, which is a priority for the people of this country, unlike for the Labour Party, Mr. Speaker, but also ensuring that we have record creation of jobs, Mr. Speaker, and that is what matters. High-wage, high-skill jobs. 500,000 more. They don't care about jobs, Mr. Speaker. We do. We do. We believe in high-wage, high-skill jobs, and that's the answer for the economy.
Well, the Prime Minister there, very enthused, wasn't he, and passionate about his arguments. Look, they clearly know it's a huge problem. It was a massive discussion in Cabinet yesterday. The cost of living, that all leaked because the government wanted to be known to the public that they're looking at different things. Dominic Raab on Sky News this morning talking about how to help with the cost of living and housing costs. There's been talk about whether or not to lessen the number of get an MO2 every other year as opposed to every year. Costs, talk about scrapping green taxes, reducing housing costs. Lots of ideas from the government about how to tackle the cost of living because they know inflation could run to 11.8% in the autumn, and that is hurting people.
It's definitely going to get worse before it gets better. The question is how long it prolongs. Interesting that the Prime Minister kept pointing to that fact. Fastest growth in the G7 last year, that's true, but from a low base. And Keir Starmer pointing to IMF forecasts for the slowest growth in the G7 next year. And the question, I think, next week will be how much people are already feeling that this year. Beth, the other question I just want to touch on, are we surprised? I know you were right that everything was going to be on cost of living, but surprised that we got through a whole PMQs, not a single question on Partygate at all?
Well, I think for Keir Starmer, he has to tread a fine line here. The Partygate issue is clearly damaging the Prime Minister. You can see it in the polling. But if he keeps going on about it, does he begin to alienate voters where it seems like a very political attack? But I have to say, when I was out on the road yesterday, of course, everyone was most worried about cost of living, but it did come up. It does matter to people and they are irritated by it.
Also, wasn't a huge amount on Russia and Ukraine, apart from that exchange towards the end about MPs being sanctioned. Beth Rigby, as always, thank you.